I will call the meeting of the Finance Committee of April 3rd, 2024 to order. We are both by Zoom and in person because we have one member participating by Zoom. We need to take attendance, recognize everyone, and on any votes will have to be by roll call. So if you could just say here, present, yes, when I call your name, thank you. Paul.
Here.
Darren.
Here.
Josh.
Here.
John.
Here.
Carol. Here. Jim.
Here.
Barry.
Here.
And the chair is here. Okay. In person. Paul O'Connor is the only person who is. Okay. Are there any citizen requests to address the Finance Committee? And I am aware of citizen requests, but it doesn't appear that they are here yet. So I will proceed and we'll take them out of order when they are here. We also have, the first item is approval of minutes of prior meeting, circulated the minutes of March 20th, 2024. Anyone?
I move their acceptance. Second.
Great. Any discussion? Hearing none. Paul?
Aye.
Karen?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Carol? Yeah. Jim?
Yes.
Barry?
Abstain, was not.
Okay, and the chair votes yes. Molly and I will sit down, put a grid together of minutes, and then make sure we get them all on the website and then. Okay, citizens petition, I do not see the petitioners on Zoom and they are not here. No, okay, so we'll come back to that. Quiet Zone Project. I believe we have Lars, I don't know how you pronounce your last name, Lars. We are going to bring you in as a panelist, and John, you're on this committee, the
Yeah.
Quiet Zone Committee. So we have a warrant article 30 of our warrant, which addresses the Quiet Zone project. John, do you want to start and then Lars as well? Or-
Yeah, I'll give a brief introduction and I will admit that there were several meetings in January and February that I was unable to attend due to scheduling other matters. But as you recall, this topic first came up last year at this time, with respect to an appropriation that was sought for design and construction of what's called a quiet zone with respect to the crossings of the NDTA in certain parts of the town. We raised questions at that time on the information that was presented as being rather dated and maybe not comprehensive enough for the amounts of money being sought and the scopes of work that this project could present. And so the recommendation was made to take a step sideways and hire an engineer to refresh the information and to use funds from the reserve fund to do that. We voted to approve that. I think the amount was $100,000 and a company called GPI was engaged. A working committee was put together and Lars and others spearheaded that. Karis was on it, Kate was on it, and others. And work was done through the fall and into the winter to come up with a proposal that you're gonna hear about now. This proposal for this town meeting would be to appropriate design funds to do the requisite design that would enable the later construction, which would be at a later and other cost to affect quiet zones. So the horns would not have to sound at the West Street intersection, the Rosemary Street intersection, the May Street intersection, Great Plain Avenue intersection, and Oak Street intersection. It needs to be clear that at this point in time, the quiet zone is not possible at the golf course because of the configurations there with respect to the need for significant costs for either a culvert or a bridge due to the equipment that crosses the tracks there to operate the golf course on both sides of the railroad tracks. So, that's a high level introduction, and, I've met with Lars many times on this. He knows inside and out. And I appreciate his knowledge, and I know that he will as well, so I will, turn it over to him.
Thank you. And can you hear me okay, by the way? Okay, thank you. Sorry, I've got two connections here. I'm not sure exactly what to say. I apologize. It looks like Mary Ann's just walking into the room. My understanding was they would be presenting a bunch of the information here, but just to course John's comments, there was definitely quite a bit of work to evaluate the technical possibilities. The plan, I think, reflects not only a way to do a quiet zone, but I think a way that's prudent in terms of trying to be thoughtful at each individual crossing. What's the most safety effective, cost effective, implementation effective way to approach things? And I think the proposal is a solid one in that sense. I also agree that the golf course is a challenge, not that it can't be overcome, but it's just going to take a lot more work. So I'm sorry that all I have is generic comments at the moment, but I'm happy to dive into the specifics if that's helpful, or how best to unfold the information for you.
I have a question. So I read the memo and I appreciate it. I'll be honest, didn't quite grasp all of it. The risk numbers, wasn't entirely sure how to read that. So I was wondering if someone could explain to me what is the difference between the risk factor under existing conditions, 31,559.51, and then under no changes at Great Plain Ave, then it's 7,258.69. So can someone explain what that is all about?
Yes, at a high level, the risk score is a severity weighted score that has been developed by the Federal Railroad Administration that basically captures what they believe the level of risk is. So the higher the number, the worse it is. So the existing conditions are the highest numbers that you're seeing. That's the existing conditions using horns. And then the ability to implement a quiet zone is based on the ability to bring the numbers below the national average, which is the national rail safety threshold, or bring it below the current conditions using with horns. There's just different standards of what we'd be subject to after implementing a quiet zone, depending on how much we improve the scoring.
Okay, so to be even more simplistic for me, you're telling me that the existing conditions are more risky than the ones you want to put in?
That's correct. In every case, our goal was to improve relative to current conditions. That's a requirement.
So can someone then explain to me why that is? Why is horns, train is coming horn, horn, horn? Why is that more risky than no horns?
So the way that the train horn rule came about in the 1990s was as a result of a variety of private no train horn agreements with various municipalities. This was particularly common in Florida. And what happened was literally there were just simply mandates by certain municipalities that a train could not operate a horn. And so all they did was just turn off the horn, and that was it. And so, as you might not be surprised to hear, all of a sudden there was an increase in the number of incidents at those crossings, because it was the exact same conditions in every respect, other than the trains are no longer blowing the horns. So as a result of that, and a variety of other reasons, the federal government stepped in and established this train horn rule, which does a bunch of things around just standardizing safety procedures across rail crossings throughout the country, irrespective of a quiet zone, but then offered as a part of the train horn rule the ability to pursue these quiet zones. And the quiet zones essentially establish supplemental safety measures, additional safety measures that have to be installed in order to at least offset not using train horns anymore. So that's where it came from. And then the risk index is based on a scoring methodology. So based on the FRA's monitoring of incidents of collisions at crossings across the country every year, and they are, by the way, they regularly update this nationwide significant risk threshold number. Every few years, that number gets adjusted based on the most recent, I believe it's the trailing 5 years of data of what's happening in terms of collisions across the country. And so our risk index is higher than the national average as is currently. And in any case, if we do any of the supplemental safety measures, and just to be clear, that's a menu of 13 different options we could pursue, of which really the only ones that we could really consider in our cases are one of two options, either gates or medians. All the others are things like closing streets or making them one way or making a bridge or putting the trains underground. But the two that are really viable for us are medians or 4 quad gates. And any of those options, when we implement those based on the what's called the quiet zone calculator by the FRA, our score now will fall well below the national average. Did that answer it? I know that was a bit.
No, did not. Thank you anyway. You tried. Thank you.
Can I try again? It would.
Well, you
I was
know,
gonna say, I could try.
I read it.
Okay,
It's a very good report, but it doesn't really explain to me why not having a horn is better from a risk standpoint. That's what I don't understand. Now, maybe it's because we could make other changes to our existing conditions
Exactly right.
with the horn, but you could do it with the horn too, couldn't you?
yes.
Yes.
So that's, I guess that's, I mean, if you're telling me that our existing conditions aren't very good, I'm okay with that. I get it. But is there any comparison between what you might be able to do to improve these intersections now and still have the horn? And would that be a better risk factor?
Yeah.
Or less of a risk?
So I don't think we evaluated it that way, but I believe that's correct. Yes, if we were to implement the supplemental safety measures and have the train horns operating, that would be even safer. I think the score would be even lower.
That is my point. So thank you. You did answer that. So then the question I would have, either to the committee or to the proponents, would be if we are now going to be going to a potentially lesser of a risk or a greater risk under that scenario we just described, why is that recommended?
We're going to lesser risk because we are adding the supplemental measure.
But if you added the supplemental but kept the horn, the gentleman just told me that would actually be safer.
Even safer.
Yes.
But you're correct. At what we proposed, we are still significantly below where we are today with horns only.
Got it.
And we are about half the national safety risk.
Got it. That's still,
Okay? So
my
all of
question,
these are true.
but my question is still out there. Why do the proponents believe that it's better to go with that scenario rather than the additional safety measures that you're recommending now, plus the horns?
Because this is not about safety, it's about noise.
It's about both.
It's about both. Yeah.
It's about both.
So just so I understand the numbers, so this, if you look at the third page of the report where you're talking about just Great Plain Ave, for example. So we have the numbers for each of the intersections and they're all in the 20, 30, 40,000. So what's listed in red, the quiet zone risk index, that's the average now with no horns. Is that correct?
That's
Yes.
correct.
So with the current conditions with horns brings that number to 19, with the national average being 15. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, and so below that, the numbers obviously go below 10,000 with the supplemental measures you've talked about. and gets our average below the national average. And to Jim's point, at the bottom, with all the measures at all the intersections, we have an average of 7,700. My guess is if we had horns, that would be even lower than 7,700.
That's correct.
But the 7,700 is deemed to be a lot better than we have and below the national average. And in your and everybody, the committee's view solves the problem you're trying to solve, which is improve safety, get rid of the horns. Am I
correct.
understanding that?
But not obtaining optimum safety.
Well, optimum safety would be to eliminate the trains altogether, or to eliminate the roads altogether. So,
But for that, because that.
okay, well, we can pick which extreme we want to use as a benchmark.
We're not gonna get rid of the road, okay? So let's try to keep this within a reason. All I'm trying to say here, and it may be that the proponents still want to move forward, it may be town meeting wants to move forward. But I think to the Madam Chair's point, you can't say you're doing this for safety. That can't be. Because there is a safer alternative that would still allow us to have roads and trains. It's a combination that you're looking for.
Absolutely, that is absolutely correct. It is safety, it is quality of life, it is economic development, it is health. It's all these factors. It is definitely not a single faceted issue. It is a multifaceted issue. That's correct. The conundrum, or not the conundrum, but where this conversation has been challenging is because I think all of us logically, left to our own common sense, would think if we're going to get rid of the train horns, that's going to make things less safe. And it turns out that if we're able to implement these other safety measures, we can both achieve some of those other objectives and improve the safety relative to what it is today.
So, yeah, I
Go
have a
ahead,
question,
Carol.
Madam Chair. So, and one of the questions that I had last year, and I still have it, is what part of the estimated, cost of this project would be necessary just to enhance our safety absent the quiet zone? You know what I'm saying? So, because clearly our risk index now is above the national average. So did you look at the costs that, what would we have to implement to get us to below the national average, irrespective of horns or no horns? Like, what's the delta to get us there? And then what is the incremental cost that would bring us to full quiet zone? So like, we have to enhance our safety at these crossings. Like, doing nothing isn't really an option. Is that right or wrong?
Keep it the way it is.
You could do nothing.
Yeah, we're
We're
not obligated
slightly
to go.
above the national average.
There's
So you
no,
could choose to do nothing.
we don't have to get below the national. We could continue the way things are. But to get rid of the horns and not increase the risk, you have to have implement these measures.
So I have one point, because I think that the report compares apples and oranges. I think that if we're looking at quiet zone risk index versus horn risk index, there are certain crossings that would never qualify for a quiet zone. So you can't say that you can't compare quiet zone to non-quiet zone, that quiet zones are somehow safer, because they're a select set of crossings. I think we need to just say what we're trying to do. We would like to eliminate as much as possible train horns in Needham, right? That's what our goal is. And if that's what we want to do, this is how we think we can get there in a way that's at least as safe as what we have today in Needham. And it's going to cost us whatever it's going to cost us. I think that
I thought that was what we had said.
no, That is not what was said. What was said was if you look nationally at the average of the safety where there is a horn and the safety where there's a quiet zone, the average safety with quiet zone is lower, is better, basically. They're more safe. What I'm saying is you're not comparing the same thing because there are many crossings that could never qualify for a quiet zone because of the type of crossing it is. They're by definition the more dangerous crossings. So I think that that has to be dismissed a little bit, but I think we have to focus on what is the problem we're trying to solve, which is the horns. You want to eliminate as many horns as possible and do it in a way that will maintain people's safety. Right?
Correct.
Okay, so I think that that's,
So can I ask one more question? One of the things that came out of this report, because the ask is for $750,000 for the study. One of the things that came out was it would be cheaper to have the MBTA do the study for us, if I understood that correctly, right? The Keolis design is $430,000 versus an outside consultant at $710. And the recommendation, I believe, is for this design. So I guess my question is, why are we asking for the 450 or 430?
So our plan is to pursue Keolis, but we are not certain that Keolis is willing to step up and do the design right now. So we have an approximate price, but we found that they can ghost. Right, to be honest. So given that our goal is to accomplish this, we are going to pursue Keolis first. If we can't get a response from them, then we have the funds to go outside.
Is there any extra liability going outside and not going with Keolis? Is there other things that you have to
No,
consider?
there's really not, because Keolis is in fact required to check the work of the outside person or outside consultant
Has anyone reached out to Keolis?
many times.
So I'll ask the next question. What has been said?
I think the answer is they've ghosted, but Karis would be the best person to
So-
answer.
When we initially engaged them as part of the quiet zone investigation, particularly looking at the golf course, because that's a unique obstacle. They actually sent, I think it was like 6 people out to a site visit for a site meeting, and we had a pretty long conversation with them. Generally speaking, they do not favor quiet zones, but they also are required to honor them and follow through on them. And that was the conversation we had, particularly about the golf course, and then as it came to the other 5 crossings that meet the more traditional definition of what you can have for a quiet zone. So they were actually quite responsive at that time. We are required to do a diagnostic review process, which you'll see as part of the cost estimate. And that's the first stop in the project to really analyze all 5 of the crossings, all of which they have identified as the crossing signals being in need of upgrade, but they have no capital program to upgrade them. And they would tell us, based on that review, the measures that we would need to put in place or the upgrades we would need to use. Can we use the same signals? Do we need to upgrade the signals? We reached out to them about 4 weeks ago on that. And we haven't received word back on when we could schedule the diagnostic review. So I think, they are able to do the work. They were very clear that it would take them much longer to do the work than an outside firm.
But once so if we use an outside firm, they still have to approve the work that's been done. So do we still have that bottleneck? Even after we use the outside consultant?
The bottleneck exists, it just means there's less control over the bottleneck. Where they still can schedule this work into their schedule as opposed to at our, what we would like as far as pacing goes, but there's just less opportunities for them to do that.
Why does Keolis not favor quiet zones?
I don't know if Lars has a better answer than I do.
I think the standard policy position of Keolis and the MBTA is they think train horns are the preferable safety solution.
Were they able to say anything more about why they believe that? Or is that just a mission statement?
In the letter that they sent to town manager Fitzpatrick back in I think it was the teens, 20 teens. They referenced that studies show that train horns save lives. I FOIA'd that letter to ask them what report they were pointing to that justified that statement. And that was the report from the 1990s based on the incidents that were occurring in Florida, where they just stopped blowing the horn but didn't do any or improved supplemental safety measures. That was the primary impetus of the train horn rule being created in Congress.
Madam Chair, the only other questions I have is respect to the money.
Mhm.
So again, I'm looking at this handout. Total construction, am I reading this correctly? 3.4 million? Is that
Yes.
what we're looking at?
Yeah,
And that's in addition, that's beyond the design, correct?
correct.
Okay. And how would that $3.4 million be paid? Is it
Yeah.
debt within the levy? So within the 3%? And so how does that fit into what our other projects are and other projects that we're hoping to do?
So the CIP.
Seems like a big
The
number.
CIP included $2.7 million. So this is $1 million more. We'll have to add that in. And, we are gonna have a debt service discussion regarding the 3% and where we are. And the answer is we exceed the 3%.
And so what do the proponents say about that exceeding the 3%?
So I don't think we're prepared to have a discussion about exceeding the 3% yet, but one of the other benefits of this approach is that we could break it up into a couple of segments if we needed to do that. So we think it's really important to get through the first phase and
But I-
understand exactly what we're looking at.
Yeah, I have a hard time always trying to vote in favor of a design when I know that once the design is done, the construction is gonna get done. Because we just spent $750,000 to do it. And if we don't have a firm plan as to how we're gonna do the construction and under what type of a financing plan, I don't think that's good government.
So we do have a debt service discussion on,
Okay,
where we'll discuss this in a little bit more detail, Barry.
One more question. So is it it sounds likely based on your comments, Karis, that if we engage a consultant, they're gonna come back and I guess not required, recommend highly some changes anyway to incur some expense in some of these crossings for outdated equipment or upgrades.
So yes, the question is who bears the expense? If the town does nothing, the MBTA bears the expense, although as I asked them, do they have a 5-year capital plan?
Right.
The answer to that was no.
Okay.
So it wasn't particularly reassuring that they were going to be making upgrades. Some of the upgrades that we are making would be required under any new crossing. So constant warning time is a feature that we only have at one of our crossings.
What does that mean, by the way?
It means that it will index the time that the gates are down with the speed of the train. As opposed to it being more the discretion of the driver to cue the gates.
And one last question, what is the median solution? How does that improve? I didn't quite understand.
So it actually puts a physical barrier between both aisles, so someone can't weave through the 2 gates that we currently have.
Which people do. I've
Right.
seen them do that. Yeah.
So that's the cheapest option because it provides that protection. The more expensive option, which is what we had been looking at last year, the sole option, were quad gates, which would have 2 gates on either side. One of the features that they have is that they have to be down for a tiny bit longer. I think it's 4 to 6 seconds because they need to, if somebody is trapped in the middle, it needs to open up and allow time for that person to leave and then close again.
Madam Chair, at one point I remember in the discussions that Great Plain Ave was not going to be included in the quiet zone. Is despite the safety upgrades, is that still the plan or is the plan to include it?
So we're planning to evaluate what's needed as part of the feasibility along the entire route. So Great Plain will be included there, but the thought had been to include Great Plain at the point where we're redoing Great Plain, so there may be other changes that are related. That's why we sort of said it wasn't included in the original quiet zone.
So, so it's still in flux. It could be 4 or 5 of the crossings that would be included.
Correct.
Okay.
The diagnostic review will give us more information as well. There's some right-of-way challenges specifically with the signaling equipment that they need to install, the physical size of it. Although again, I think the MBTA is gonna run up against that challenge if that signal fails and they have to put constant warning time in anyways to find a location, whether it's on their property or trying to work an easement out with the town or a neighboring property in order to accommodate that equipment. Because they are required, if they replace those signals, to put that equipment in.
And for the new equipment that we're putting in, who will be in charge of the maintenance costs? Who will be liable for that?
When we spoke to the MBTA, because I think there had been a question last year about maintenance costs and whether or not there was a maintenance fee charged to the communities. My understanding is they have the right to charge a maintenance fee, but they have not charged a maintenance fee to any communities that have implemented a quiet zone.
And one more thing about the medians, I remember there was a concern at one point that it would interfere with snow plowing or other maintenance. Is that still a concern?
The temporary medians, the ones with the stanchions in them, will have to have a small maintenance budget on them because they will likely get hit and they will need to be replaced. If we were to do something a little fancier in the downtown that involved granite curb, there wouldn't be the same maintenance issue.
Thank you.
But regardless, there's still gonna be, the golf course is not gonna get done, so there'll still be a horn there and potentially a Great Plain.
So that is my question. So even if we do 4 out of the 4, 5 out of the 6, let's just start with not doing the golf course. You know, how many kind of residents does that still impact? There'll still be horns at the golf course, and there's no future plan to try to solve that. Is that right?
I don't think it's fair to say there's no future plan. The answer is it's gonna take more work to work it out, and it's gonna take discussion
what
with
does
golf
that-
course as well,
But what
so.
does that mean? Like, in terms of what?
Well, it
mean,
means,
is it-
it means,
Like,
my
what?
own personal opinion, it's gonna mean at least over $10 million, I would expect, to do the construction there, whether it's a bridge or a culvert. So you have a significant capital expense that will be different there than from these other 4.
But it's just, is it fair to just solve this problem for, I don't know, 80% of the residents, but still 20% are still dealing with the horns? Or should we be looking at a plan that's really not 3.4 million, it's 13 million?
I don't think we have information about that yet, all right, but I think the elimination of hundreds of horns a day is a benefit to the town. And there are thousands of people in Needham who will be grateful for that.
But there'll be many people that will be ungrateful because the horns will still be blowing. Those thousands of horns are still blowing by the golf course.
Well,
Every train will still have the
We'll
horns.
still have 4 horns in that location.
So,
It's
So
a very good point. If I may, it's a very good point, and it's the same thing that I'm sure this committee and the select board and lots of groups in town struggle with, like things like what to do about schools or other major infrastructure investments in town, where sometimes it's just not practicable to get everything done all at once across town, and so we try to be strategic to make progress towards the ultimate goal.
no, it would be helpful to have an answer on that. I'm speaking both as a finance committee member and I'm a town meeting member for precinct 8. So my constituents, none of their horn problems will be solved by this plan. So I'm just trying to get my arms around, like, what is the longer term plan for, and what will be the cost? So I think if we're kidding ourselves if we're thinking that it's a $3.7 million plan.
I don't think we've said that that's the final plan, because we've said it does not include the golf course. We're being very clear, all right? But if your residents in precinct E are like me in precinct J, the answer is you're gonna be eliminating more than 80% of the horns that I hear as I listen to the train come all the way across town right now, through every station.
I guess so, Marion, but you're not eliminating any horns in precinct 8. I mean, I'm not
I think that-
understanding the map,
that's-
like, that's
That's
fair,
what needs to
right?
be clear, that's what
Right.
needs to be clear,
That's
and I think that's the whole thing,
So
going into it, that absolutely needs to be clear, so people know that is the case.
Right,
What
and I
is-
mean, I personally, like, I grew up on Long Island, okay? Horns are like, it's like background noise, so this doesn't necessarily resonate with me, but it does for the constituents in my precinct, so I just feel like we need a better answer for that.
Do we have an estimate, Madam Chair, as to, following up on Carol's point, what the likelihood is of Great Plain Ave not being a quiet zone?
No, I don't think we know that.
Well, there's not a reason why Great Plain Ave cannot be a quiet zone.
Well,
The
that isn't
decision
the question,
is,
excuse me, it's not the question.
Right.
I thought Josh said that at one point it wasn't in the plan.
That's correct.
Now it is in the plan. And then I think someone said, I thought Karis might have said that it's gonna be in the diagnostics or something.
Mhm.
Okay,
Correct.
so do we have any estimate of the likelihood that it won't be in the plan? I guess what I'm trying to get is the same thing Carol just said. So now, what if it's not just the golf club that's not a quiet zone, but it's Great Plain Ave that's not a quiet zone? So, I mean, what are we really trying to achieve at that point? And that's right in the center of town. And I mean, maybe there's not a likelihood, I don't know.
We have to do the feasibility to find out.
So it's possible then you could end, I'm sorry?
I don't think,
it's not possible that it's not ever gonna be a quiet zone, right? The decision on it is related to us and the fact that we're looking at redoing the street in there. Right, so we need all those pieces to come together at the same time, and we need to be prepared to do that. But the purpose of the diagnostic study is to be sure we have the information, so we're ready on that intersection to go.
But if it's not done, maybe because of your construction, then you end up with with two of these quiet zones not being very
It's more
quiet.
delayed as opposed to not being done, I would assume.
That's also true, and we don't expect that all of this will happen instantaneously. It's going to take a while to work through each quiet zone, so.
I wanted to follow up on something Carol said, is if the train, if the horn is honked in precinct E and people in precinct E hear it, does anybody in any other precinct hear it?
yeah.
So have we all measured how far it goes? So,
Where are you?
I mean, I don't know, I don't, it doesn't bother me either, I'm a city girl, but I guess I don't know, like, so we can't contain it. If it's still being honked someplace, then the horns that are being honked in that precinct, everybody's still gonna hear anyway.
The same way that they do.
That they do right now, right? So it wouldn't even just be the people in precinct D, it'd be everybody, presumably.
Well, it's not,
It's wherever that sound.
there's like a radius of
Yeah.
noise, I would imagine, but
Yeah.
it's more acute in precinct 8,
Right.
you know.
I recall that
But one benefit would be that the Oak Street crossing, which is also in precinct D, would be a quiet zone. So while that's certainly not the same neighborhood in terms of how people sort of walk around there every day, I mean, that certainly is a benefit, but also that noise cone is very much influenced by the engineer and how loud they have the horn set to, how long they're blowing on the horn, the humidity levels, wind patterns, whether it's wintertime or summertime. There's a lot of factors that influence how far and wide it impacts things.
So actually, I had a question about that, about the loudness of the horn and how long they, whether they're pulling, pushing, whatever they're doing. So are there rules, regulations on how loud the horn can be? Are we experiencing, excess loudness that exceeds the regulations?
So the regulations are that the train horn is supposed to be sounded at 96 to 110 decibels for
Yeah.
a minimum of 15 and up to 20 seconds in a pattern of 1 or 2 long, 1 short, and 1 long. And as I think we all know, there certainly seems to be different ways, different train engineers do that. And in terms of evaluating or monitoring that, no, we don't have any sound, excuse me, sound monitoring equipment at the crossings to evaluate whether they're complying. The decibel rating I talked about, I believe, is that when they're 100 feet away from the crossing, that's the volume that they're supposed to be achieving. But we would need to set up, professionally engineered sound monitoring equipment at each crossing to determine whether or not they're complying with that. I think, as we all know, it feels like some days it's much louder than others, and it sounds like a different pitch in the horn some days than others. But as to what's causing that difference in volume and pitch and everything else is not 100% clear.
But to be fair, Lars, we believe that if they implemented the standard 100% of the time, we would have more train noise than we have today.
Absolutely.
Do not push for them to meet their standard.
Okay, Paul, did you have anything? I'm sorry, I wasn't looking over at you.
Just an observation, and this comes from, something a tragedy that happened over 20 years ago in town, where the trains came back. They were relatively quiet. We had a young girl, either late middle school or high school, doing things that kids shouldn't do, and she was killed. And so right after that was when the train horns came back in full force. So, it's something I think that if some town meeting member may make that observation during this debate, and people should be prepared to respond to it.
That was not a grade crossing, just for people in the room to know.
But also, if I may,
So I think we're getting off the discussion if we start talking about that particular incident. Thank you, Paul, for reminding us, but.
Well, but I just did want to say
may I
something.
make a general note? I'm sorry, I apologize. I just wanted to make a general note about what a quiet zone is and what it isn't. So a quiet zone is only the ceasing of the routine use of train horns when a train is approaching a crossing. The bells still ring, the gates still come down, the lights still flash, and then the train, throughout the entire time it's through town, the engineer still has full unfettered use of the train horn at any time that the engineer identifies any form of safety issue, including if there's as simple as an animal that's on the track. So the only thing that a quiet zone does is eliminate the use of train horns, the routine pattern when they're crossing the road. That's it.
Karen, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to loop a few things together. So you had said that Keolis really likes to have horns, and the federal government has created a horn strategy that everybody's argued that having horns on these crossings is really important. And there's even regulations that describe the decibel level, how far away from the crossing, for how long, and how many intervals. And so it seems to me that kind of counter what maybe you had said, Marianne, was we don't push for them to operate the sounding of the horn at the appropriate level because it might just be louder for everybody. But that really isn't asking the federal government and the people that are running the trains to operate their level at the safest place if they're not operating the train, nor the train horn at the appropriate level right now for safety for our crossings anyway. Or did I misunderstand that?
So the observation I would make is that one of the things that helped to set the standard is train horns crossing the plains in the US at grade crossings there, which is a completely different situation from a town of Needham that has housing right along the rail where the train is going 10 miles an hour through town. Okay, where it's going at high speed across an intersection in the plains of the US.
Yeah, I know.
So
I've
there's
lived out
one
there.
standard for the entire US, except in the worst case, that's kind of where it is, it's not us.
Okay, I do want to steer it to a safety if if we're gonna spend the money, I just feel like it needs to be about the safety.
I just have one last question in the material. It was suggested that some of these, the implementation of quiet zones could cause the gates to stay down a little bit longer than they had in the past. So kind of is public safety or the fire police on board with that factor?
So we're gonna let Karis take that, but the first piece you should know is these changes are coming to us at some point in the future anyway. So with that, I'll turn it over to Karis.
So I was gonna say that. So, when we did find out, particularly Great Plain Ave was the item of concern because the proximity of the station to the intersections of May and Great Plain would require that for the time that the train is in the station with constant warning time, that the gates would be down. We talked to both police and fire about both May and Great Plain Ave. Neither police nor fire had a concern with May, and I think we found that actually May is currently down while the train is in the station. And that's because there are opportunities for them to get out of the intersection and take alternate locations. There are some concerns about the Great Plain Ave. If we were to install constant warning time. But if that signal fails and the MBTA has to upgrade that signal as part of their capital program, we would be required to have constant warning time either way, and we would not have a say as to whether or not it gets installed.
So, I don't know if anybody has anything else. Personally, I could never support a quiet zone because for twice, I was once in a derailment of a train and another time almost hit by a train when gates did not come down and there was no horn. Crossing a railroad and the train was right there, 15 feet away, moving at a very slow pace because they were coming up to a crossing, but there was no horn. And being in a derailment when this was a truck that came across and there's nothing a train can do once something is on the rail. So if those gates somehow do not function properly, there is a huge disaster. And the horn, and I'm not saying it needs to be as loud as it is. I mean, I understand the regulations and I understand that, you know, the noise is a real big issue. But there is also an issue with equipment malfunction that can cause problems.
I just noticed that today there's a problem with malfunctioning equipment on the existing
In
infrastructure.
Needham.
I've seen the gates stay down or, you know, police having to direct traffic through the down gates. So, I mean, I think it's better to have.
It's better
improved
when they're
safety
down.
infrastructure. Well, sure. Okay.
When they don't come down. But yeah, so anyway. All right. What do you have all your questions answered? Everyone, can you have all the questions answered?
Well,
Are you ready
Obviously.
to? Yes. Go ahead.
no, I'm not gonna vote for this
Okay,
unless,
because you want to talk about the debt service.
right, I mean,
Okay.
I'd wanna know where
Yeah.
what projects are gonna be edged out? How far are we gonna be above 3%? I mean, this may be a wonderful project. It could very well be, and there could be lots of people in town that want it. I respect their views. But, the point of the matter is, there's a lot of projects that a lot of departments and offices and citizens want. And unfortunately, as we've seen now in many municipalities, including Brookline now is a budget shortfall, the city of Boston does, the state does. At some point in time, we have to be a little bit more conscious of how much money that we're spending, and not just today for a regular operating budget as we incur debt, moving forward. And so that's why, I think we need to have that discussion.
So Jim, I don't disagree with you on that. I think that discussion is important. I do think it's. There's a little bit different about this particular warrant article because this is, again, something here that this is from free cash. We're not borrowing this. And this I view as something that there will be a benefit from this. It might turn out that we only do one. It might turn out that we do two. It might turn out that we do 4 or 5 of them. But we'll not know about the 1, 2, or 4 or 5 of them until we do this process. And I think that there will be benefit that justifies the expenditure of free cash to go this far. The later discussion about construction and what we do and how we do it and how much it's gonna cost is a whole different one. And that discussion will weigh up against the discussion of the Pollard School and the discussion of DPW and the discussion of the library and the discussion of all those things. But the best way to get us educated to get to those discussions is to get the education process going forward. So although I share Louise's sentiment and Carol's sentiment that, you know, going into this whole process and still as I sit here, and I've lived in this town my entire life, that the horns don't bother me, but I've sat with people and I've listened to people, and there are people who it really bothers. I'm not saying they're right, I'm not saying I'm right, but I'm saying that they clearly exist out there, so, my view is let's spend the money on the free cash now, we're not borrowing anything, to increase the education process and factor and allow us to make the decisions about construction in a more educated way, just as we're doing with all our other capital projects. So that's why I'm gonna vote in favor of this warrant article. I'm not saying I'm gonna vote in favor of future warrant articles on this, but I think that the education process should continue with respect to the design. So I just wanted to get that out there. I know you and I agree on a lot of things, but we don't agree on all things, and that's good. But I just wanted you to know the benefit of what my thinking is.
Yeah, no, I'm sitting here saying, I've been around since '93, so let me tell you, that's 31 years, and I'm trying to think how many projects that we spent $750,000 in design we didn't end up doing in construction. You know, I don't know, I'm racking my brain, John.
No, but
I don't know how many.
that could be the case, but I think that,
So in my opinion, if you're spending it now, sure, we're gonna do the due diligence, we're gonna, you know, whenever it comes up for construction, we're not just gonna wave a wand. But the reality is it usually gets done.
So let's continue this during the debt service discussion, because I think that'll give us more information on where we are. All right, let's go to amend zoning bylaw solar energy system.
Thank you very much.
We're all warmed up, Adam.
See.
Thank you, Lars. Yes. Please. Looking to see who all.
Leah's here.
Okay.
Bill expecting Tasha. Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes,
I mean,
yes. Lee. Okay, so let's just do the very brief, let's set what we're trying to do here. So this is solar as of right.
So, we're modifying the, zoning bylaw to allow a multitude of different uses and different applications. Some of which will be by right, some of more intense applications would be by right with site plan, and some would be by special permit. So, just very quickly, solar installations today, are permitted on houses controlled through building codes. And we have already, as you probably aware, near the transfer station, a very large scale ground mounted system. So the additional applications that we're looking to make permissible as part of an outgrowth of the work that the Climate Action Plan Committee has done and has recommended is that we allow for small and medium scale ground mounted applications on the one hand. And on the other hand, that we allow for canopies of parking over parking lots and parking garages, driveways as well. And then in addition to that, building mounted canopies that would go over not just a roof mounted structure, but would go over, let's say, the mechanicals of a building. And we've identified, I think, a thoughtful way on these applications in different districts. And one of the notes is that we are allowing small scale ground mounted systems, which will be up to 1,500 square feet by footprint, and on side yards and in rear yards. And in the front yard, it would only be permissible by a special permit. And we would also require screening as well in the front, and would also require screening if they're very close to the setback lines as well. And we have been, very specific dimensional regulations throughout the bylaw.
So they'd have to comply with the existing setbacks? Or
So-
no?
So yes, depending on the application, it would either be a district level setback. Or it would be for a primary setback or an accessory setback. An accessory structure may have a smaller setback than a primary structure. So you can imagine, for instance, if you wanted to put solar, for instance, over your garage, and your garage is a different setback than your house, you'd want to be able to naturally install over the garage section. Or if you had no garage, but you wanted to create a canopy, that would be an accessory use of a house and the structure, and it would be at the accessory setback, not the primary setback.
Madam Chair, how are ground mounted solar, how is it typically mounted? Is it on concrete or freestanding?
So there are different types of ground preparation for ground mounted. I think it depends in part on the soil conditions, topography, there are other factors. But typically, or common, it's with some form of a cement base.
Would that count in lot coverage, for instance?
Excellent question. So we're not double counting the surface area of a ground mounted system. Which is to say, if if you have a house and and a garage, it's obviously covered, included in the lot coverage. And you added 1,000 square feet or 1,500 square feet of surface area, that would be addition to the lot coverage of the house and the garage. And as a result of that, there may be certain lots where, and this is part of the affirmative control that the town would like to ensure. That's how we've defined it in this, in our bylaw, so that way we have the control of lot coverage. To make sure that we're still preserving that concept and open space in our yards and on our lots.
Okay, so it would count just like a house or a garage would count?
Yes. But if you had, for instance, an application, if you had 1,000 square feet, 1,000 square foot area of a roof mounted system, that would not obviously be counted towards lot coverage because it's over the existing covered lot by the main structure. But there can be applications where, for instance, a solar panel might extend 10 feet off of one side and 10 feet off another side of a building. That would be seen as additional surface area and counted towards the lot coverage total.
Thank you.
So would this permit canopy, like parking canopies to be built on all of our existing school parking lots?
Yes. Liam, I just would like.
Yes, that is correct. This bylaw essentially allows for canopies over parking lots. Under the parameters of the existing parking lot rules. So we have certain setbacks for our parking lot. So yes, you could construct solar canopies over an existing parking lot at a municipal school.
Or anywhere.
Or anywhere.
Yeah. It doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. It's a permitted use.
So that would really end the fireworks and Needham. Just saying.
So can you clarify, because I didn't follow what you were saying about the ability to add solar, like if you have a driveway, like, so if you have a house, a garage, a driveway, and really the driveway is what brings you to the end of your property, you're now able to extend the solar there or not?
So you would be the dimensional regulations would control, but to the extent that within the lot and these dimensional regulations, yes.
So but if not, if
Then
the
you-
garage is at the edge of where you're allowed to build, you
Yeah.
would not be able to extend over that.
Correct.
Okay.
But
Okay.
you could you, if you could put an ADU on your lot, you could put an ADU, you could put a
So
solar
So
on the ADU.
you could, but that too is already controlled under the dimensional regulations of the bylaw. So you're not extending,
Right.
Okay,
and we're not creating non-conformities either.
okay. John?
So, with respect to the small scale ground mounted ones, I understand correctly that if you want to do it in your front yard, it's, you have to get a special permit primarily so that you guys can regulate, not you guys, but so that,
The ZBA, in fact.
that they can regulate what landscaping and other types of things might be required, visually. I guess my question is, what's the difference between front yard, a side yard, and a backyard? Aren't they all visible to neighbors? And so what's so different about the front yard as opposed to the other two?
So passing by a front yard, everything is entirely visible on the street, has a different visual impact. In your rear yard, for instance, I can really only see my neighbor kicking a soccer ball if I'm jumping with my son on my trampoline, because we have a fence. So if they had a ground mounted small scale system, I wouldn't be able to see it in their side yard or in their rear yard.
Not from the front street, but the neighbor in the back would be able to see it. So what's the
Potentially.
difference between the neighbor in the back and the neighbor across the street? They're both looking at something. So I'm just wondering, why isn't it all by special?
Oh, I
permit?
see.
Is what my question is, because I don't think there's a difference between a front yard, a side yard, and a backyard with respect to what someone sees on this, for this ground mounted unit.
So other than the frequency, just by being on the front, naturally in the front, it was a public policy choice to make these as accessible as possible for homeowners, should they choose to create their own energy, for a multitude of reasons that they may decide to do that. So we wanted to ensure a path of least resistance from a regulatory point of view in the side and the rear yard. But in the front yard, where there is more visibility and a greater visual impact to more people, that's where we thought it was a reasonable thing to do to require a special permit.
I disagree, but that's okay. I'm glad you answered my question, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, so for a lot of these homes that have been rebuilt on lots, they've maxed out their surface area. So presumably, there are a significant proportion of homes that wouldn't be able to build, because it would add to the surface area, build on whatever open area exists on their lot today. And my guess, do we have any sense of really what percent of homes?
But they have a much larger roof than our poor little
well,
houses that have.
Yeah, but you put it on the roof now.
You can always put
You
it on.
can always put it on the roof.
Yes.
That's not what we're really talking about.
The point of this is it was to create, was to utilize public policy as a measure to enable additional applications beyond which some people may have. It could be certain factors of roof structure at a certain angle on a certain exposure that prohibits the ability to generate energy from a roof. However, at a low.
No, I understand what you're saying.
So, but
So in theory, I've got a 60-foot driveway. I could build a tunnel in essence with panels on top.
except you're limited by these other dimensional regulations,
Okay,
by setbacks
okay,
and by lot coverage.
okay.
So Dave. If a commercial owner builds one of these, we get personal property taxes on the solar panels and all the other stuff?
It would be taxable, whether it's personal property
Or some other,
or considered real estate, but yes, it would be.
it would be one or the
taxable.
other. So it would be taxable for commercial.
And to a limited extent, it could also increase the amount of the stormwater fee that would have to pay because the impervious coverage would increase,
Okay,
would increase.
but it doesn't change for residential because we wouldn't be able to tax that.
Residential, well, to the extent that it's incorporating the value of the house.
It gets,
It would
Is it
be,
gonna increase the value or decrease the value?
I don't know. I don't know,
but
but that
there's
is
not
really.
many examples of single-family homes building standalone structures. So I don't have any basis to.
To determine for residential, but commercial, we think that would add to the tax base.
Yes.
Especially for parking, garages, that kind of thing.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions regarding that? Okay. All right, planning consulting assistance. Article 9.
So my only comment that I'd like to make on this is I believe that you're gonna find over the course of the next 5 years or so, the planning board will be coming to town meeting with a series of significant zoning bylaw amendments for all kinds of array of different uses between mixed use, commercial uses and certainly residential uses. And I see that as an opportunity in response to, if we are able to regulate certain things, we can promote economic growth in a town. Time when we have significant infrastructure expenses and other expenses. And in order for us to be able to plan appropriately to meet the challenges of the day and to be able to meet the needs of our future needs, we'll need additional funds for planning consultants. There are a variety of itemized planning initiatives that we're pursuing. We have additional need for a new parking study for the whole of the town. That's really important to increase Needham's competitiveness in the commercial sector with other jurisdictions, so we can win and attract more business to town by having more market-centric requirements for parking. Where clearly we've already had a micro study conducted in 2 parts of town that have demonstrated we have an overcapacity of parking. And that's a challenge for business, and it's a challenge for landowners. And anything that we can do, I think, at this time to, for instance, reset the parking requirements will be a benefit to business and to landowners.
Overcapacity meaning we have too much parking or not enough parking?
We have in some cases too much parking.
We require too much parking.
We require too much parking, and based on that micro study that Stantec previously conducted, it demonstrated that there is effectively an oversupply.
Okay. All right, questions?
My view is, this is money that would be used for undefined projects at this point. Yeah, so I wouldn't support this. I think if there's a need, that's brought to the finance committee, and if we, believe that it's a good expenditure of funds for the town, then we can support it. But I don't, to have a little extra free cash fund or whatever, I don't support that.
Yes, Carol.
I have one question. So you had we've had warrant articles that provided these funds prior, right?
So, so there've been a multitude of, funding requests. We had another previous request, for instance, to increase,
I think there were
staff, the
two.
planning
I
staff.
thought there
No,
was
there were two for,
prior to this.
prior to this weren't articles. For
Do you,
consulting work.
so do you have, my question is, do you have from those prior appropriations, you know, listen of what it was spent on, so we can, and how much is left? I'm assuming there's nothing left, but how many dollars might be left in those prior appropriations?
I believe we have nothing on this. Lee, I'm gonna ask you to provide some detail and context, please.
Sure, we received two appropriations. During the first appropriation, most of the money went to fund the work that was done on Muzzy and the rezoning around that property. The second appropriation that was done is being used to augment the state's grant for the work under the MBTA Communities Act. And when that's expended down, I think there's only going to be about $8,000 left in that account. So in the case of the MBTA Communities Act, it was fortunate to have those funds sitting there in this bucket because it enabled us with the grant to move forward in a timely way to secure a consultant to be able to allow the town to engage in that planning effort. And so the whole purpose of this bucket of funds, if you call it, is to allow us to bring on consultants when these kinds of issues arise, and to do it really in a timely way. And I think it was effective when we implemented it in most recently around the MBTA Communities Act.
And we still have a reserve fund of how much?
We have
1.8.
No, our reserve,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah,
Is
it's
1.8
over
million.
$1 million, although we're gonna need
Okay,
to move
so
something
there,
else.
so there's always, and we had the same argument before, there's always an opportunity in the event there's a need to come and, you know, request those funds.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'm kind of torn about this, because I understand the need, as you've described it, to have the flexibility to plan and hire consultants to do that. The tension is that with the prior appropriations, they've each not been spent on a multitude of issues that the planning board is looking at, but only on a single, for the most part, a single thing. So, it feels like
That was not also what we were told.
the understanding was always that it was going to be used on multiple projects rather than on a single project.
I think it really depends on the project that comes forward. And I don't think, and the MBTA project, for example, came forward. It happened to be a huge project. I think the monies that we're looking for here, probably the Stantec parking work will probably, you know, compromise, will probably pull down around $25,000 out of this $80,000 appropriation for that. And I don't know what other projects will fall out of that, but certainly the parking study is the one we hope to be able to start with an appropriation in July, because it's holding up really our ability to relook at the parking regulations in town and update them so that we're regionally competitive.
And that would have been a nice warrant article that we could have considered for the town meeting, the $25,000 for this particular study. We could have asked what the study hopes to accomplish and all the things, and that's my point, Madam Chair.
Another use that will be coming up, or another demand that the town will have coming up is, regardless of what happens at town meeting with the citizens petition to modify zoning bylaw with respect to the floor area ratio, I believe the town is at a point where it would like to study again this concept of the large house. And there are some significant impacts to private property rights and to home values on at the point of acquisition and at the point of disposition with the new construction. And on that, I believe it behooves us to have a fiscal impact, understand and to quantify what, what's at risk for homeowners, for taxpayers. So that's another area on top of the parking study. So to whatever extent this may pass, will, I suspect, come back and make additional requests, so we can on a timely basis study these and other projects and planning initiatives to be responsive in the market and to the residents of the town.
So on that point, I would say that makes Jim's point again, because I think that that's something that town meeting would need to vote on, whether or not they want that question study. So, I think either more detail.
I would make a motion that we recommend not to adopt Article 9, $80,000 for planning consulting assistance.
I second the motion.
Okay, is there discussion?
I just want to ask, I mean, I think it sounds from people's comments that the specificity is important. So if a specific project were identified, that would be something more concrete that we could vote on and town meeting could vote on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the whole purpose of budgeting and the whole purpose of submitting our request, whether it's a DSR 2, DSR 4, is to do that, is to say, we've got a project, we've got an issue, we need to deal with it. We'd like to have certain monies appropriated to do it. We can have a great discussion, compare it with other articles and decide if that's an initiative that we think is important for the taxpayer money. And I also point out that if it's an emergency situation, if we are confronted with something that, you know, we desperately need some additional assistance, as I said, there is monies available in the reserve fund as long as the appropriate case is made. So it's not, we're not leaving the planning board high and dry with the opportunity to get their work done. They can either plan for it and come before us with a regular warrant article, or if it's an emergency, completely unexpected, they can come to the reserve fund.
Okay, further discussion? Hearing none, I will take a roll call vote. Paul? The
Yes.
motion is, okay, just making sure you know the motion. Karen?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
Sean?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. I think it's, you heard, we're looking for specifics.
I understand, clear. I thank you for your time and your comments and
Thank
feedback.
Okay, the next article, Public Works, infrastructure. Article 31. So this one is an annual article.
38.
Oh.
I'm sorry, the Article
Page
31.
30, Article 31. So this is an annual article. The amount this year is significantly lower. And Dave, it is higher than in previous draft of the warrant. Dave and I had some conversations about this particular article because of the low amount this year. And so you were able to, based upon an assumption of free cash, which we do not yet have certified.
That is correct.
You're able to increase the amount to $1 million, which is still about half of what we have done in the recent past
That's correct.
for infrastructure. Okay,
So
yeah.
Is it 1,065,000?
It's $1,065,000.
Okay, but then you're talking about 1 million is what? What did you mean?
So in the past, we have appropriated around $2 million,
Okay,
2 million to 2.1. So
Okay.
it is still about $1 million less
okay.
than we have appropriated in the past.
And we're mad that they're looking for less money. That's a joke. Okay. All right. So we can get the discussion going. I'd like to make a motion that we recommend adoption of Article 31. And this again assumes that the free cash is available or certified for that in the amount of $1,065,000 appropriate for public works infrastructure.
I second that.
Thank you, Tom. Okay, so, and I'm sorry, I'm just gonna take the lead on this particular discussion. So free cash, there are a lot of demands on free cash this year, and even though free cash was very high, the result was appropriating somewhat less for public works infrastructure, in addition to which, when we met with Karis, last time, we were told that there are still funds available from past appropriations. So it won't hold up any work being done this year. However, the level that we need to invest in infrastructure is not $1 million a year. And, we need, I just want us all to be clear because
If I recall, when we talked about the sidewalk survey, for example, it's like 40 years. So-
right.
So why are we allocating less?
Because there were other priorities,
On free cash.
right?
Okay,
So I think the point is, we just need to be cognizant if this has got to be ratcheted up in future years.
Back up,
okay.
Right, we don't want Jack Cogswell's bubble to reappear.
right. We were making good progress.
I would just add, we do have a few other funding sources this year that we don't usually have.
It's fine. We won.
Jack's bubble.
Yeah.
Hope remembers Jack's bubble, right?
Okay, any further discussion on this article? No, coming to a vote, Paul,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Barry.
Yes.
The chair votes yes, it's unanimous. Okay. Next one is expense state funds for public ways. This is the annual article, for the chapter 90 funds. Article is that, Article 17, Article 17, okay.
So there, I know there's an answer for this, but I'll ask it anyway. Is there no number because,
We don't know.
so we might just authorize them to spend whatever it is we get? And do we have, and the explanation is this kind of the sense of what it will be? The preliminary is 9/0.
That's the preliminary number that we have, but it could go up, it could go down.
If it's different than what we vote, since we voted without a number, we don't need to re-vote it later.
That's correct.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we recommend adoption of Article 17, authorization to expend state funds for public ways.
Second.
Okay, any discussion, Josh?
Yeah, so I recall that the chapter 90 funds have been saved up. Do you know what the current balance is, of those funds?
It's a little over 7 million, we looked at it today. But some of those funds will be used for Mark Tree and the intersection of Honeywell and Great Plain Ave. Nowhere near the balance, but probably $2 million between those two projects.
And that's in anticipation of Great Plain Ave.
A portion of Great Plain Ave. Probably not.
Okay, any further discussion? Hearing none, coming to a vote, Paul,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Barry,
Yeah.
and the chair votes yes. Okay, we're gonna turn to the special town meeting articles, and then FY 24 operating budget, and I think everyone should have a special town meeting warrant. So will this be the only change to the FY 24 budget?
Yes.
Okay,
The, purpose of this is to ask to increase the appropriation for debt service by $14,525 and reduce the reserve fund by the same amount. The reason we're seeking this request is we've done a bond anticipation note, and based upon the combination of interest and principal, we can pay it off in full when it matures in June, with an additional $14,525, so the debt budget will be fully expended. If we don't, which is fine, we would have to roll it over, and I would have bond counsel costs to incur for rolling over 14,000. That's a significant investment.
we're gonna spend $2,000 to roll over 14.
Madam Chair, I recommend adoption of the warrant article to be numbered to amend the FY 24 operating budget.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to a vote. Paul,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim.
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
the chair votes yes. The next article is the town-owned land surveys, which is on page 3. This one we discussed during the DPW budget hearings.
I recommend, Madam Chair, that we, recommend, or make a motion to recommend adoption of the unnumbered article to appropriate for town-owned land survey.
Second,
Karen seconded it, discussion. Hearing none, I will come to a vote. Paul,
Yes.
Karen,
yes.
Josh,
Yes.
Don,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes, unanimous. Unpaid bills of a prior year.
Madam Chair, I make a motion that we recommend adoption of the unnumbered article. Unpaid bills of the prior year in the amount of $23,653.42.
Second,
Discussion.
Madam Chair, can I ask how, I've noticed that these numbers have increased in recent years.
It's still the residual result of COVID, which, attention to detail both, by us and by private vendors and checking out on billing. Noted one of the bills is FY, 2021, and it's just, it's a legitimate bill, and they didn't get around to billing us until, it bought us, back in, October of last year, which was too late to get into the October town meeting, and that's why it's in the May town meeting.
Is there a time limit when vendors have to invoice? Or-
Preferably, they should be invoicing us within 30 days after they're entitled to their compensation. I guess the other question is there a time that, a time limit to lose out on the payment? We have been advised by council, current and prior council, that generally we lose that case if the services were rendered. And the fees are appropriate, then we'd probably lose it for.
Under the doctrine of quantum merit,
well,
John,
I'm just curious,
Among others.
And there is a statute of limitations, though.
that's for contract. I think quantum merit, I think.
There is none?
but they don't charge, I mean, for them not invoicing us, they haven't charged us like a whole bunch of late fees on that, then if they
No,
didn't do,
it's
right?
a service,
Yeah, okay.
we have strongly rolled against the interest, it would, the burden probably has to point that we did not pay.
Right, okay.
Okay. So we had a motion,
Mhm.
second, any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll come to a vote. Paul,
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
And chair votes yes, unanimous. The next item is, I believe, appropriate for public education programming. This one was a new article that we saw for the first time in the special town meeting, or was it the annual last year?
And the annual, last year.
The annual.
Special.
Yeah, the
That's
special
last
was in the
year.
annual last year. So we were advised we have to vote, the funds that then are transferred to
The meeting change.
the Needham channel.
And these are funds that are sitting in the account,
All right,
so that's what's appropriated out.
And we get this from
The company.
Yes.
yeah.
So, Madam Chair, I make a motion that we recommend that the adoption of the unnumbered article to appropriate for public educational and governmental program in the amount of $471,657.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll come to a vote. Paul,
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
And the chair votes yes, it's unanimous. All right, appropriate for auditorium upgrades and improvements.
And this is the high school one?
Well, it doesn't say that it is the
Dan.
high school one.
Yeah, Dan here.
We do
Happy
have the
to-
superintendent.
Happy to try. Good evening.
Evening.
And you did send us something.
I did, and here is your copy.
You drew the short stock time?
Always
Yes,
does.
and told me I was on tonight. And that's fine. Okay. So I'll, Big picture is that the three venues where we have both school programs, academic programs, and performance programs, the high school auditorium, the Pollard Auditorium, and the Newman Auditorium, need work. We, with your support, did a study over the last year and a half with a company that looked at specifically sound and lighting, because we're not looking to, change out seats or anything like that, but sound and lighting, which is antiquated, is in disrepair, and in some cases non-existent. The details are in here. What this, it's gonna take a while to address these things, frankly. Last year, we started with some code work. The designer, the architect noted some things that had to be done immediately, and we did some of those during school vacation last year, and we finished some of those in the summer. But they left some code areas, for example, curtains that have to be fire retardant, rigging which holds up the lights, that needs to be repaired for this coming summer. And there's a cost to that, which is part of this article. And then furthermore, there is another cost for design work at Newman. And the design work at Newman would take place between, well, there's an emergency preamble if you support that, it would take place over the summer. And the idea would be to bring you at a fall town meeting or May town meeting, a request for construction funds based on what the design is for light, for sound and lighting in the Newman Auditorium. What that would mean is that, fast forward to say, construction is going to take a while, because even if they can get going on school vacation periods next school year, but they can't really work during the day because we use those spaces for the Newman Auditorium is used for kindergarten, first grade, physical education every day. It's used for music classes. So we have to take advantage of vacation periods and the summer of 25 to complete construction, lighting and sound at Newman. And so by the September of 25, if you're kind of following along with me, we would have Newman done, we'd have the code work done at the high school. And we would have the bare necessities code work done at Pollard. Anything that would happen at Pollard, and there's great interest in reconsidering Pollard as maybe the larger of the two performance centers, Newman and Pollard. That would be part of a bigger project with the town, and we're kind of pushing that into feasibility and later discussions. So this warrant article addresses the code issues that have surfaced, and will take care of those before kids return to school in September. It will also provide the go-ahead to do design work at Newman so that we can have an auditorium, which is heavily used by the community and by high school students, elementary school students, for lighting and sound, kind of keep the performance spaces alive and going for programs and for kids in the community.
So if I'm looking at your chart and the things that are in your FY 23, FY 24, FY 24, the first three, that's all been done?
Yes.
The first three columns?
Yes.
And so you're looking at the next two columns?
Yes.
And that's your 344, 558.
Yeah, the total amount is 344 with call it $98,000 for the repairs, the code work repairs, and 247,000 to change for design.
Okay, so of this 344, 558, is all of that for work? Slash construction slash repairs, or is some of it for design?
It looks like
47.
250,000 of it is for design,
Mhm.
and 98 approximately is for construction repair. I should really say repair.
And so the concern I have is that is the 247 in design, that's what's gonna lead
To the 2 million.
to the
2 million, which is not in the CIP.
Hmm.
And therefore not in that model, yeah.
Now, what was not addressed in this warrant article, what is not addressed really in this FAQ is the high school auditorium. And that's something we're going to have to come back at because there are still needs around lighting and sound. And the sound system at the high school is about 25 years old. And we have to we rent equipment at Newman and at the high school when we, or the Friends of Music provide some support when we want to have different levels of performance there.
But you do have it here in fiscal year 28.
We do. Yes, it's there. Down the,
Like $2 million.
not funded in any plan, yeah.
How long should this equipment last, given that Newman only lasts 10 years, you know?
So I don't have a great answer to that because I'm not an expert in this, but I would say that part of the problem with Newman is that everything has gone digital. And when we were on the cusp, as I understand it, when we redid Newman, it was kind of on the cusp of analog and digital, and we went analog.
You got a discount on the analog.
I don't remember. If I did or not, but- So now it's digital and, that may be a good thing, but it's kind of your only option. So I can't really speak to, what I will say to you is that one of the things we have to do in the schools, and we've started to do it, is think differently about how we are maintaining with the town those spaces. Because it's not, it's not your grandfather's auditorium anymore. And because it is digital, and when you think about all of our buildings, they're just so sophisticated. We need a different level of expertise maintaining them, and we can't have every community group, performing group, just wander in and use the equipment. So we've been good with that, and we've partnered with the town on that, but there's still more work to do to make sure that we're really preserving and protecting and maintaining that equipment.
Can I just follow up on that last thing? Do you still intend to allow community groups to use?
Oh,
those
sure.
facilities? Okay.
Yeah, and right now there are procedures and signouts and, to do that. And we'll continue to do that. I think it's possible the cost for a community group to use it might increase because I would probably expect that I would want a Needham Public Schools employee who is trained in using the equipment on site rather than volunteers who assure you that they know how to handle this equipment. They've been doing it for years. So, but that's kind of the next step.
So is there a revolving fund where funds are collected from rental of the facilities?
There's a revolving fund, for, facility rentals for the town and schools. We have a theater revolving fund, but the theater revolving fund is more for costumes and for the, tickets and the, licensing for.
Set design, maybe.
Set design, things like that, yeah. But there is a revolving fund for facilities rental.
I have a question. Idea whether there are any funds in there that might be available to supplement some of this?
Some of this?
Yeah.
I don't think so. I don't think there's that amount of money. I don't have that information.
So when we talked about the Great Hall, we did make a suggestion that the fees be looked at, so maybe the fees should be looked at for non-town or school organizations.
We had done that. We did a review several years ago, and maybe it's time.
Yeah, to look at those
Yeah.
again, yeah, so that there could be an ongoing conversation.
And just really quickly, because I'm not exactly sure how all these things fit together, but when you do certain projects like this, do you take into account that shortly they're gonna be renovating a building like that? So like, or I don't know, I just always think about like when you do things at your house, it's like you don't wanna like do over the work like 3 or 4 times. And is that thought put into it? I mean, you don't have to go into detail, but okay.
No, and really just for Powell, because, Newman and the high school are, they're set. So we're doing de minimis at Pollard. We're gonna make sure the curtains are certified, and we have to remember that project, if it comes to fruition, the community supports it, is 8 years, out. So we have to make certain, some of the bare minimum things are taken care of, but we want to focus the investment in Newman because that is the performance space, and that makes sense.
Well, I'm all in favor of the 98. I know it doesn't get you very much, but, I think their work should be done. We should be making as much of an investment in that aspect of education as we do any other. The design one, Dan, I need to kind of know more about the future expense and how that fits into the capital plan and the debt, so I don't really, I'm not in a position to be able to say good or bad on that part.
Okay.
Anyone else? I think something that might be helpful is, a breakdown of where all this free cash is going and a prioritization in the event it doesn't all materialize, since we don't control DOR. Thank you.
Yeah, no, certainly, but basically, if the free cash is not certified by the time of town meeting.
We don't have anything.
We wouldn't be taking
Right.
action on those articles. But I don't anticipate that will be the case.
But it could be $1 million less than anticipated. You don't know.
That is correct. I feel confident in the number that we're working with, though.
My recollection is that Dave usually underestimates. what they do.
So, Madam Chair, similar to the
Yeah.
quiet zone, we had a very lengthy presentation on that. Maybe, I don't know if we've had a lengthy presentation on the,
No, this is Brandon. On the auditorium?
yeah,
Yeah, this is Brandon.
so how do we,
So if you want some more information.
I
we'll
think
just get
probably
more
that's
information.
gonna be important.
Okay. What kind of information would be?
Well, I guess there's a couple different things, and I think I'd kind of want to know where it fits into, the overall prioritization between what town side wants and what school side wants for capital as you're moving forward. Because I think what I'm hearing earlier is that, we have a debt management policy and, free cash is one thing. But if some of this is going to be paid for by debt, I'm talking about the construction, which I'm assuming it would be, then that would probably be within the debt that is paid within the levy, which we try to keep at 3%. And we're gonna go over this later, but it sounds to me like we're already over it by the assumptions that we're making now. And this is not in the plan.
That is correct, the number of different items that have been discussed in the last.
So it's
couple
kind of a combination, more information, slightly more information. I know it's a good presentation here. Just about the need, but more important than that, how does it prioritize with the rest of the needs within the schools as well as the town? And then an analysis of how we can possibly fit it in with respect to debt. I believe that's just my thoughts.
So I'm comfortable at this point recommending adoption of the article. I think there's just a general philosophical disagreement maybe among members of the board about whether it's appropriate to go ahead with design funding without knowing, in anticipation that the construction will be using debt. Do we consider the debt question first, alongside the design funding that's using free cash, or do we consider the debt question after? I think that's maybe what we're discussing, right?
I would hate to spend money when we as a committee might conclude, I'm not saying we would, might conclude that we are unable to pay for it, the project. That to me doesn't seem like a wise expenditure of funds.
I guess the way I'm thinking about it is that the design, whatever we purchase, the report or the schematics of this design, in my mind, won't expire. That's my understanding. So
Well, there have been other projects that have been designed on more than one occasion. So I don't know if that's true, Josh.
Okay.
So I think here, and I'm more with Josh on this one, is that I think that you need looking specifically at this and looking specifically that this is design funds for the Newman Auditorium, which clearly bears the brunt of the music and arts program, both within the schools and also the community groups. The study's been done. We funded the study. The need has been identified. This is to design for Newman, for those needs based on that study. It's gonna come up next year at construction amount of $2 million, and it's gonna be weighed against other things at the school. I put forward or might not put forward, knowing that they have this $2 million project they want to get done. And we're gonna weigh it against other proponents who come forward with programs that we are gonna decide whether we can pay for all of them or some of them, and how, in what manner we pay them, through free cash or debt. I'd like to get to that stage, particularly in a situation where I think there's an identified need and a well-used by all age groups thing. So I'd like to get to that decision point on the construction, weighing against everything else. And we can't get there until we do the design. And so I'm in favor of doing it. And I look at each particular situation for the need to do it or not to do it, and making the decision that I just made, at least personally on this one. So I'd like to get to that point by going ahead and doing this. So we can weigh it against other things, but I think, Dan, you guys are gonna need, and when you're coming to us next year, if you want this one, there's other things that aren't gonna be able to get done. And I think you hear that.
Understand.
May I make a motion? I move that the finance committee recommend adoption of the article appropriate for auditorium upgrades and improvements in the amount of $344,558.
I second that motion.
All right, any further discussion? Hearing none, coming to a vote. Paul?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Jim?
No.
Barry?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. So it is whatever number of people we are. Okay,
Thank you. We'll tell Mary Ann you did, we'll tell, Dan you did a good job.
Please do. I'd appreciate that. I need an attaboy.
The next item is
She'll give you that in her peer review.
Is rescind debt authorization. It is the next, item on the special town meeting warrant article. This would rescind some unauthorized debt. So it does not affect, I'm sorry, unborrowed,
Unborrowed.
unborrowed, not
Authorized,
authorized.
but
I meant
unborrowed.
unborrowed. So it will not affect anything in the.
Madam
debt
Chair, I
service
make a
schedule.
motion that we recommend adoption of the unnumbered article to rescind debt authorization.
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? Hearing none. Paul?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Josh?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Carol?
Yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Barry?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. Okay. Coming to our debt service discussion. Okay,
How long do you expect this to be, Madam Chair?
I expect us to walk through it, to take questions and then come back next week with further elaboration.
I noticed that there's an executive session that was scheduled to be at 8:30.
Are there people here in the audience who remember for the executive session?
Yes. You want to go into executive session?
No, well, we can't go and we need to
We-
finish with it, but I
right.
just want to be mindful of that.
Okay.
And so I think that's definitely what Jim's point was.
Sure. So if we just walk through this and then we can discuss it next week. So what I did was basically take, everything that was in the May 2024 annual town meeting warrant. Assume that everything is approved, that is a debt article. And I don't think that we've had much disagreement on anything that is a debt article. Take the CIP that finance projects. The Pollard Middle School with High Rock modification and Mitchell. At 22% reimbursement for Pollard and 0% for High Rock or Mitchell. And I did a scenario 1A and B with the fire engines included as debt excluded. And ran the numbers where we exceed the 3% levy. from fiscal year 27 through 30, and we see the 10% from 28 to 39. We exceed the 3% pretty significantly, with the fire engines and without. So I then ran some other scenarios, and
Which line, Louise, are you looking at?
the ones that are highlighted.
No, but it's a K or J?
J.
J.
K is just to give a sense of debt service as a percent of revenue without the excluded debt. So where are we with respect to debt service? And we fluctuate quite a bit, but that also includes water and sewer. So scenario 1B was basically the same thing, take the fire engines out, and it looks a little bit better. We don't peak quite as high with respect to our total debt service, as a percent of total revenue, which peaks at 14% under 1A, but stays for quite a few years above between 13 and 14%. Does not come down until fiscal year 2039.
And by smoothing out, you're proposing using the debt stabilization fund.
So I actually, once we get to scenario 2 and scenario 3, I don't even think we need to use the debt stabilization fund.
Okay.
Because we end up with years that are 3 or more years away with a 3%, between 3 and 3.4%. Assumptions here are 7% interest.
Mhm.
You know, interest is a little lower, it come down a little bit. And because we're going to be below 3% in fiscal year 25, 26, and 27, that gives Dave an opportunity to structure debt so that he can bring those years down
Got it.
to 3%. So the 3% problem goes away, but what I've assumed is no further library projects,
Right.
postpone the second phase of DPW out to May 2018, or 2028 or 2029 town meeting for a vote, which means you don't start work until
Right.
2030. And I did take phase 2 of the quiet zone, since it was in the CIP, I did move it out 1 year, but now it's another $1 million. From what was in the CIP.
So you moved it out a year?
Yeah, I made all the notes up, okay, yeah.
And what did you assume for revenue? Growth?
So our revenue, 4% growth. Just straight, I didn't change Dave's assumptions on revenue, and I didn't change the interest assumptions. for now.
That's fine. I'm just curious.
But, I mean, the bottom line is, if we want to look at staying close or only exceeding the 10% for a short period of time, we need to push out Mitchell. I also think we need to look at affordability. I did assume a 22% reimbursement. Maybe if the project can be a little tighter financially, we can be okay. However, that doesn't mean the taxpayer isn't paying a huge amount more on their tax bill, or a lot more, not a huge amount more, but it's paying a lot more on their tax bill, because excluded debt does go from $9 million all the way up. It peaks at $37 million, which is another $28 million that has to be allocated on the tax bills. And there's just no way around it if we're at a $330 million project with 22% reimbursement.
And now you have to add the auditorium work.
We have to add the auditorium work, the library, come in and talk about phases 2 through, I forget, was it 2 through 5? DPW, I included a phase 2, but they came in and talked to us about a phase 2 through 5. And other projects will continue to come up. And there's not really any room to bring any new projects in until 2034 within the levy and well beyond that for excluded.
And
So,
the phase one project is not excluded yet.
no. No. But it doesn't solve the problem for the taxpayers. See, I
Right.
think there are two elements. One is the fiscal policy,
Right.
and then the second one is the taxpayer. And the fiscal policy is also designed to help the taxpayers so we don't have huge tax bills.
But that's a decision taxpayers can make themselves. That's their, at least for the exclusion, we're not imposing that upon them directly.
Right, not directly.
Correct. They're choosing.
Louise,
Yep.
what assumptions did you make about, when the debt is borrowed?
Oh, I, made the same assumption that Dave assumed 25% in year 2 following the authorization. I assumed 25%, 50% in year 4, and then the residual in year 5 or 6. I followed the assumptions that Dave has.
So I mean, 2028 is a big year. I mean, that's when the Pollard debt starts to kick in.
Assuming an October 2024 town meeting design and the timeline that was discussed at our meeting. If it moves by a year, then things change.
October 24? That's not possible.
No, October 20, what did, October 26?
6.
I just want to be, okay. Yeah, I'm getting tired, I'm
2
sorry.
years, yeah.
Yeah, remember when we had the discussion on the feasibility study, the Hank, the, schedule he gave projected at October of 26. Vote on it.
With a first debt
2 years later.
2 years later. I have the very first debt, 1 year later. So, yeah, we can move that out 1 year, but it doesn't solve the problem.
No one said it was, but.
It just moves the numbers by 1 year.
But in terms of the discussion before about, free cash, that doesn't impact this. The debt certainly does. When we discuss construction for talking about quiet zone, we'll have to figure out where we could fit it in and when we could borrow that. The free cash, strictly speaking, doesn't impact these numbers.
Right.
Unless you take something out of here
Oh, you use free cash.
and use
Right.
free
Right.
cash for it, like we
For
did
the-
it for the feasibility study for Pollard. So we were originally
Right.
borrowing it, now it came out of the debt model.
This is great, Louise. Thank you.
I know why Dave doesn't like doing them. Every time you add a scenario, all the formulas get messed up. So I'm not sure, where that leaves us. So a couple of thoughts that I had. One was when we look at the total debt service, we should talk about CPA. Yeah. Because CPA debt service is high relative to revenue. When it gets put into the pot, it is, basically eating up some of that 10% levy at a higher rate than, it's eating up some of that excluded debt capacity that we used to have.
Is our policy, the wording of the policy slightly different for the 3% versus the 10%, correct?
Yeah, the 3% is within the levy, but.
No, I
Yeah.
understand what it means, but in terms of guidance, in terms of, is there a difference how it is perceived whether if we're exceeding the 10% for a while, and obviously primarily due to excluded debt, I would think that wouldn't be viewed as harshly, I guess, as 3% policy that we have, or am I mistaken?
It's the makeup that, I'm assuming you're talking about the ratings.
Yeah,
They're looking at, the structure of the debt and how it's funded. If we were at 10% and it all was within the levy limit, it would probably be viewed, more negatively
Right.
than with the excluded debt, because that implies, taxpayer buy-in to
right,
the higher debt amount.
right,
And hence why the policy is the 3%, which is general fund recurring revenue, is specific, says 3%, whereas the other will be taken into account.
Right.
Currently, we take into account all revenues
right.
and all debt to strive to stay at 10% or less. But the key is strive, it doesn't say absolute.
Right.
So,
But we also know that the more you go above 3%, then the less there is for the rest of the operating budget. So,
Right, the 3% is, I guess in terms of where, in terms of this exercise and thinking about projects that, trying to, I guess, work harder to stay within that 3% versus not to ignore the 10%, but if,
well, I would probably agree with the fact that if you don't control your 3%,
right,
you will have a larger problem
right,
operationally. And as Dave just said, I didn't know that, but apparently that would also be looked upon less favorably. But I think, I look at it, we were used to be 2% back in the 90s. And then we raised it to 3%. But the reason why we kept it at 2% for a long period of time is because we thought there would be an adverse impact to the operating budget if we were spending too much money on debt. We concluded in the late 90s that, or early 2000s, whenever it was, that we should increase it to 3%.
And that's really where we're doing, like, the maintenance on our buildings. So what is not included anywhere is work that might need to be done at the other schools,
right.
because they're all getting older.
You were just.
Right.
Your ability to do other projects,
Right.
your capacity is gone. You
Right.
not only are eating into the operating budget monies, but your capacity to do other unknown projects is gone.
Right.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist,
Right.
period.
Unless you continue to eat away at the operating budget.
Right, right. And we can push off, you can move Pollard over by 2 years, but that just means then Mitchell gets pushed off also another 2 years. So, because we can't do both simultaneously in terms of ability to pay. And this is not necessarily related to the debt discussion, but we're discussing affordable housing in Needham. And the higher the taxes are, the less affordable it becomes. And so while there may be debt exclusion votes, I think that we do need to remember that. So, and we're also gonna need more infrastructure. Sewer, $13 million is gonna affect our sewer bills.
So it remains my view, and it has been for a number of years, that it's capital planning, whether it's within the levy or outside or outside of the levy. All of it needs to be done in concert with the financing plan. It only works when the two hands are working together in the same direction. And with all due respect, that's what I don't believe has happened in the last number of years.
Madam Chair, I make another point about the importance of the debt limits, or at least monitoring the debt levels. Debt, once it's issued, it's a fixed cost. Like if there's an economic downturn, the only
Still gotta
place,
pay.
yeah, you still have to pay, and the only places to cut are the operating budget. So we don't want there to be an economic downturn, but we also, we need to plan for one if it ever happens, and we don't want to be in a position to have to cut the operating budget.
Which is
Yeah.
why the 3% needs to stay at 3%.
I don't disagree with that.
And then the problem with the CPA is the more of the CPA is used up by debt, the less is available for other projects. So now those other projects start competing with general.
Right. The good
Like
news
the
is,
Claxton
the good news is there's another revenue source.
Right.
The bad news is if it's debt, then it just eats away at the capacity for the other projects that we would normally do within our, no, that makes entire sense.
Okay, so what would you like to see? Further,
No, I haven't spent time with
Yeah.
this.
okay, so if you could,
I reserve the right to tell you what more I want to see after I spend
that's
some time. on it.
perfect, perfect. I look forward. Everyone else too?
What's our current interest rate being? Your assumption set up, but what are we paying?
We're paying, about 5. And that's the coupon rates.
And that's historically what the town has done. They're conservative on it, and then what happens is the reason why we're willing to go over 10% or 11% and then work our way down is because even when we do that, when we get to the actual years, we find that we've either had a little bit better tick in our revenue or we've had a little bit of tick down on our debt. And as a result, it evens that off. But
So what you're saying is that this
That
becomes
works.
a worst case scenario
That's-
somewhat.
that, I believe, is worst
Yeah.
case scenario. But that's why, when we did this, the last time that we were over 10%, we were only over by, I think, 2 or 3 years, I think. And it was only like 12 or 13%, but then we came back down. Not only that, but when we actually had the experience of it, not just the projection, but when the experience happened, it actually was better than that. So yes, it's worst case, but the point is we can't be so worst case that it's, at 15% for any extended period of years. And the other thing, as Josh says, is we can say that everything is going in the right direction and that we're being very conservative on all of our assumptions and estimates. But the point is, if we're not, and if in fact, then we have to do some of these projects on a more, on a more urgent basis, then I think that's when you're in real trouble.
But I think the real problem is we can't program anything in that isn't, like the discussions that we have had with various departments or citizen groups with other ideas of other projects. They cannot be programmed in the way
Because there's no.
where we are right now.
Right,
today.
and that was the point that I was trying to make so inartfully earlier.
It wasn't inartful.
Thank you.
All right, so please send me notes, and if you want to see other things, I'll power it over by year.
Add the
Won't do anything.
auditorium, please.
Add the auditorium. What happens if we have the auditorium?
Yeah.
Well, and the
You need to
additional
add-
million.
You need to add Lumen Auditorium
Yep.
and the high school auditorium. I would not add Pollard base. I think that what I heard was that
Right.
Pollard is, even though they
Part of
have it
that.
there as a placeholder, it's gonna be.
Incorporated in,
Overall project.
And $1 million for the fire ground.
sense of those students. I'm not using.
Yeah, I like that. I didn't understand.
That's fine. Happy with it.
Okay. All right.
But the good thing about when doing this exercise is, seems to me that if you only know you can buy so much,
Mhm.
then you get to focus in on what you really believe is the prioritization of the town. And I think that's a good exercise.
Well, and I think it's something that needs, and we brought it up last year at town meeting, but that needs to be reinforced.
Mhm.
Agreed. So you want to cut executive session?
Yes,
So I make a motion that we go into executive session under exception 3 to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining with the ITWA and NITEA, where an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public budget. And the chair so declares, and so not to return to open session before adjournment.
okay, I do so declare. All right, and we need a roll call vote, which we need either way. Dave, how do we handle executive session on Zoom? Okay, we'll take the vote. Paul,
Yes.
Karen,
Yes.
Josh,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Carol,
Yes.
Jim,
Yes.
Barry,
Yes.
and the chair votes yes. So we are now in executive session, so I think we have to get everyone else off of the Zoom. Do you have a separate name?
We'll have to create a new Zoom because it's a webinar.
For Paul,
Yeah.
Well,
okay.
we can just do it. How
Can we-
long do you think it'll be, Kate?
Can we just call Paul?
Can you just fill them in?
Or we can just call him.
Somebody up, so.
Here, Paul, we're gonna call you and put you on speaker.
Okay.
Okay, all right.
Like, what I
You're
do?
gonna call me on my phone
Yeah,
or
do you have a number?
you need my number?
We do need your number, Paul.
781-424-8303.
Okay,